It's been a huge honour for Webb's to bring this body of work together from the private collection of the late Sir Miles Warren. Join me in welcoming John Coop, Managing Director of Warren Mahoney, to say a few words. Thank you very much.
It's a real privilege to be asked to talk tonight. I think many of us have really enjoyed the recent documentary, Morris and I, as a kind of rediscovery in a way of what many of us already knew. It was about the partnership that those two enjoyed. The story of Christchurch, both before and after the earthquake, and that whole idea of a creative relationship. I knew Miles, and I knew Morris as well. I'm conscious though as I speak that there'll be people here who knew him and were closer to him than I. So there's been a kind of renaissance of sorts in the last few years in the appreciation of Miles's work, yes, but his work is well known. It's actually how he worked and the relationship that he had with Morris. Very much a partnership of mutual respect. Actually quite an austere period probably when they first grew up, and then that flourishing after the war of their work and their relationship. And of course not only architecture but so many other things. And so they were part of a wider milieu that grew, and I think they were conscious of that. He was conscious of the role he could play in encouraging others and supporting other creative people. And that's so important and is still very important today. And I think for those of you who've been to his garden, you see that in the house and in the wider garden. So many different artworks, sculpture, paintings, a whole network, a whole ecosystem of relationships that I think added up to Miles's creative life. He's very clear that his parents weren't actually interested in art. He didn't inherit a collection. He had to learn about art and he had to learn to appreciate it. He had to learn through his career the role that art could play as time passed, actually also investing in art and making it part of his life. He had a tough early life in some way, I would say, emotionally. I think, through that early period, the 1930s, his parents had tough times economically. There was wealth, but also, some real challenges. Through this lens of this collection, it's an interesting thing to reflect on. And for him, painting was also a key part of his creative process. He was quite an accomplished artist in his own right, of course, mainly of building. He describes how he would work often late at night. He was legendary in that regard, and that he would actually paint a story that he would have, of course, been anticipating telling the following day to a client. And I think through that, the architecture would come, and then he would pass it on to his team and it would be developed. So I think there's a close synergy there between his own creative process as an artist, as an architect, and then, of course, the works that he would have very carefully chosen. And I think instructive as we look at his collection, which is, when you think about that, it's an absolute triumph, through his life. His work, of course, also an enormous triumph, but his own collection too. The last thing really is to talk about, I think, his sense of place. We talk a lot about sense of place today in our architectural work. We talk about creating that through understanding context, cultural context, urban context. I think that would have been, I think that's different to the way that Miles thought about his architecture. He was very much a builder. He was quite a practical person. But once again in that book, he describes in some detail at the age of 12 going into a building at Christ College. And there's a beautiful description of the room, the light, the way the light comes in as a very young boy of that room. And he says that it had an extraordinary sense of place, which is quite a rare phrase for him to use. And I just leave you with that in relationship to the works, because of course his gallery had the same sense of place, which he very carefully assembled, would have thought about, designed himself with the collection within it. So for those of you who will be lucky enough, I hope, to enjoy his work and create your own sense of place with it, the very best to you, and have a good evening.
It's been an absolute joy to hear the responses from audiences around the country as we've toured them over the last month. Our cover feature, featuring Pat Hanley's protective helmet behind me, is a fine example of Sir Miles' cultured outlook. Sir Miles would go on to form a long-standing relationship with Hanley, as evidenced throughout his collection and in the vast mural which is integrated into the architecture of the Christchurch Town Hall. And, of course, Bill Hammond's resplendent painting, Wishbone Ash-2, Cornwall Road, which was made towards the end of the artist's life. This series features Hammond's distinctive bird-like creatures and continues his exploration into caves, urns and vessels. And of course, we're delighted to present a number of works by Fiona Pardington as she prepares to represent New Zealand at Venice in a couple of months' time, among many more significant works.